Carrie Neegan, thanks again for joining us today. Carrie, we'll go to you first. So there's not going to be a search of the landfills. Is that just a practical move, something the families didn't want to hear, but something that has to be said in spite all of the sentiment?
I can't help but think about what recently happened. We had billionaires in a submarine. They were advised not to do it. Searches were like, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. Is not looking for Indigenous women in these landfills a needle in a haystack. I think the priorities the government has set forth are quite clear with that statement. They're not willing to risk their people to look for our people, and that's what I am hearing from this statement. And yeah, it was said, and it's not what the families want to hear. Maybe the government should really take a step back and put themselves in the position of these families. Would they want to hear this news in such a manner?
And Neegan, to you now. So now the reason given is the safety of workers and no guarantee of finding any remains. Is that legitimate?
Well, there's certainly resources that can protect people when they search landfill sites. It's not easy work. The feasibility study that was published in May says that, but it also says that it's possible. And there was an anthropologist with experience in forensic studies like this. So it's certainly not an issue that's quite acceptable to say things like, oh, there's health and safety concerns. I think Carrie's right. There's very little will on the government to do this. But there's also ways in which the government could have, from the very beginning, posited this so that it wasn't so harmful, didn't create more trauma. Just by simply using the word feasibility alone indicates that you're trying to decide the cost of human life or human remains. From the very beginning, both the Winnipeg Police and the Manitoba government have bungled this in so many different ways and shown a lack of sensitivity for the families, because I think the families are also realistic. This is not an easy search, and I think if it was handled in a way that was much more kind, like, for example, they also announced yesterday that a memorial will be built for these women. That's a step in a good direction, but unfortunately it's drowned out by the kind of insensitivity and dehumanization language that's used.
And back to Carrie, so going back to the reaction of the families, that the province and the city don't care and that their family members should not be disposable, what are your thoughts on that?
Going off what Neegan just mentioned, I think there should be some sort of inclusion. You know, the government needs to reach out to the families and include them. Let them know that their concerns and what they're feeling is valid. I think right now, by them taking a step back and not including them in these decisions moving forward is creating this rift, and it's getting further and further apart, because the optics of it, what's being played out on social media is this government doesn't care, and the government's like, okay, well, you know, there's this cost. But you know what? If from the start, if they engaged with the family, you know, brought them in, talked to them, you know, and worked out a plan and had maybe the family's input leading this announcement, maybe it wouldn't be so harsh. You know, right now it's just like, okay, we made this decision. Okay, yeah, we're sorry, but let's move on, kind of thing.
And finally, Neegan, what should happen?
Well, I think that the statement last evening of Premier Heather Stephenson was not handled very well, was quite insensitive. And Carrie's right. The families have been talked to, not with. In fact, right after the press conference, family members came out and said they felt re-traumatized, and they also felt that there was no inclusion to their opinions. You know, the key is here that we're talking about human beings. We're talking about human remains. But of course, we are talking about Indigenous women and girls. So naturally, we live in a society that has perpetuated perpetrated an incredible genocide against Indigenous women and girls. And further adding to that is the lack of politicians. In fact, in many ways, this is the cause of much of this, is the lack of willpower by politicians, by institutions, by leaders in society to deal with this issue seriously, to put all the chips in the middle and commit to the 231 calls for justice of the Murdered Missing Indigenous Women and Girls inquiry, beyond just the basic premises of trying. We need to try to search for these human remains of our sisters and our aunties, because they are all of our relatives, not just Indigenous relatives. They are of all of us here in Manitoba. So I'm kind of speechless by the whole past 24 hours of witnessing this, but at the same time, not very surprised, because this is the way Indigenous women and girls are treated all the time.
Well, Niigaan, Carrie, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us. We'll have to leave it there.
Miigwech.